afternoon. Welcome everybody to our second program in our 2021 Sawtooth Forum and Lecture Series, Mountain Chronicles, brought to you by the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association. I'm Megan Nelson and I'm the Association's Museum Docent. So before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that here in the Sawtooth we are located on the unceded and traditional lands of the Agaidika and Dukudaka bands of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. We pay honor and respect to the tribes and the land itself. Alright, now, this program is free of charge thanks to our primary sponsors, Redfish Lake Lodge and the McNichol family, in memory of Roland McNichol, who was an avid series attendee and a steward of the Sawtooths. We thank them for their continued support. As many of you know, the association is a member-based nonprofit. Our mission is to preserve and protect the Sawtooth and Salmon River country through preservation and education. Our operations are funded by donations, grants, memberships, and book and map sales at our bookstores. We hope you will consider supporting us tonight by making a donation at our Sawtooth Bowl, using your credit card at our dip jar, purchasing a commemorative brick in our walkway right here, entering our 2021 drawing to win a spotting scope with a smartphone adapter, it's very cool, or by becoming a member. Would any current members of CIHA please raise your hands? Wow. Thank you all for your support. If you have any questions, just ask someone in our blue shirt and we can tell you more about how you can support us and our mission. Tonight, we are excited to bring you Jeff Gabardi, presenting stories of miners and prospectors in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. Jeff Gabardi is a retired mining engineer for the USDA Forest Service, Minerals and Geology Management. He received his bachelor's degree in mining engineering in 1980 and a National Minerals Management Award in 2000. From 1979 to 1983, Jeff inventoried abandoned mine sites in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. He also worked as a Forest Service mineral examiner, primarily in southern Idaho and Nevada, served as the lead mineral administrator for Leasable Minerals Program on the Caribou National Forest, and prepared and reviewed large active mine financial assurance bonds, and facilitated inventory and reclamation of abandoned mine projects throughout the United States. Jeff was known to schedule mine inspections near good fishing spots. So this evening, Jeff will regale us with stories about prospectors and miners he met while doing mining claim inspections. Special guest and CIHA Board President Stuart Wilder will join him for a few tales. Please put your hands together for Jeff Gabardi.
Thank you, Megan. That was very generous of you. Actually, that was a very nice introduction. I'm just going to tell you, I could talk about 10 or 15 different characters that I met early on in my career. I'm going to try to focus on just a few places, but I want to focus on not just the people, but where they operated. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Asarco's claims, a little bit about Livingston Mine, a little bit about Rough Creek and the Seagraves family, and then I think we'll probably go up Slate Creek and we'll talk a little bit about Fletcher Fisher. What do you got? Forest Service people snickering in the back. Come on, come on. Which Elmer? Oh, and then we're going to end up 4th of July Creek, and we're going to talk a little bit about Elmer Enderlin. But before we get started, I want you to listen to the wind really close and be real quiet for just a second. And in the wind you'll hear, "Elmer, turn on the key! Elmer, turn on the key!" So when we get to Rough Creek, we'll talk more about what that all meant. By the way, there was 3 Elmers. That's why I had to ask which Elmer. So just to get started, we got to get a little bit of background here. Probably really started in about 1968. And that's when a agent for a mining company walked into the county courthouse in Chalice and said, I want to stake, or excuse me, I want to file about 50 mining claims. And so he went ahead and he filled out all the paperwork, filed these 50 mining claims. And he then walked down the street to the Forest Service office, probably drove his nice fancy pickup down there, and he walked into the office on the Chalice National Forest and said, I need to meet with somebody that can give me approval to do some exploration work in the middle of the White Cloud Mountains at a place near Baker Lake. And so he was directed back to a person that said, okay, and at the time he was going to have to go through a special use permit authorization. So he went through all of that work, submitted his plan, and I think probably somebody on the Chalice Forest said, you're not going to be able to build a road there. So can you think of some other way to do this? So he said, okay, I'll helicopter drill rig into the base of Castle Peak, and we'll go ahead and we'll do exploration work. So in 1968, 69, and 1970, they hauled in, they flew in, helicoptered in a drill rig, and they drilled 25, 26 holes, 300 to 500 feet deep, and they made discovery of, anybody know what mineral they were looking for? Molybdenum, right. So they made discovery of a molybdenum deposit there. Well, they came back and they said, well, we really want to build a road into there. So they had staked more mining claims that extended all the way out to the East Fork. And they were planning on constructing a road into there to do more development type drilling. Well, that's when it kind of hit the fan, because in 1968 a New York Times article picked up on this, what was going on, and then it became national news. So, by the way, this mining company was ASARCO, and ASARCO stands for American Smelting and Refining Company. One more time, American Smelting and Refining Company. They were a 100-year-old mining company in the United States. Most of their emphasis was on copper mining down in Arizona and in the Southwest. But what a lot of people didn't realize, they're a subsidiary company of a bigger 400-year-old mining company. And that company is called Grupo Mexico. So, a few years ago when they were spinning off assets, they kept a couple of their major assets in Arizona, and they're under the name Grupo Mexico. The mining claims that are still existing in the White Clouds are under the ASARCO name. So that's the distinction between the two. If you see anything in the newspaper about ASARCO versus Grupo Mexico, same company. Okay. So then what happened was once this came in front of everybody's view of causing the potential of an open pit mine in the White Clouds, then the Idaho delegation got together, and there was a guy named Church, a guy named McClure, a guy named Hansen. Who was the fourth one? Anybody know? Jordan. Lynn Jordan. Exactly. They got together, and just like they do in politics today, they kind of worked out a compromise. Come on, you guys. Jeez. They compromised, but get this. In 2 years' time, they passed the legislation that created the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. Okay? So, what did that legislation have to do with the minerals? Well, what it did was it closed the entire area, it withdrew the entire area to any future mining claims. So there's no longer a capability of locating mining claims. There was a few claims that were in the patent process. That stopped almost immediately. There was a provision in there for requiring plans of operations. For anybody who had valid existing rights, they were able to then file a plan of operations and continue to do some work. And that went on early. There were a lot of plans of operations that were filed. It also required a reclamation plan and bond. And that really took about 10 years before that transition took place. So by the time I showed up in 1979, a big part of my job was not just looking at the mining claims for some type of reclamation work or potential liabilities, but it was also to get some of the prospectors and miners under plans of operations. Okay, so that's kind of the setting, and that was the need that I was hired to do, more or less. There was another provision in there, by the way, that had to do with acquisition of patented mining claims, and that was pretty unusual at the time because you'd have to do some valuation of the mineral resources, and that would factor into the appraisal. But over time, there's been several groups of mining claims that have been purchased by the government. And the first one was probably the Silva Mine that's up in the Slate Creek area. And it happened right about when the recreation area was being created, and it was through a trade with Bunker Hill Mining Company in North Idaho. And so they worked out some kind of arrangement so that the Silva claims would go into government ownership. Then the Greenback Mine, which was about 5 miles into the wilderness area, there was 250 acres of lode claims that the Greenback Mining Company approached the Forest Service and was a willing seller. Forest Service was a willing buyer because it was sitting right in the middle of the Sawtooth wilderness, and the government purchased those mining claims for about $150,000, which was a pretty good deal at that time period. Little story about Greenback before I move on. We went in and reclaimed a mine shaft on the Greenback, and this was probably in the early 2000s. And we'd heard about it because wilderness crews had gone in there and they tried to throw everything they could down this shaft, and it kept caving open. So about every 3 or 4 years, this shaft would come open again, and then it'd be reported as a real hazard, which it was. So I was contacted, and we were putting foam plugs in mine shafts at the time. So we helicoptered foam to be sent up there to plug the shaft. Well, I had some crew people that I wasn't able to go up there with them, and it was unfortunate because I hardly ever missed a chance to get out in the field. But I was sitting in the office in Twin Falls, and the dispatcher comes back and says, "Hey, you need to come back and listen to this conversation going on." So my guys are on the ground. They're on one side of the mountain where the shaft is. The helicopter operator is saying, "Shall we tell them that there's a pack of wolves on the other side of the ridge?" And I did a quick risk analysis of who was up there. No, I didn't know. No, I said, well, if they get close to the top of the ridge, then you better tell them there's going to be problems here. Fortunately, the wind changed or something, the wolves took off, and life was good. But anyway, that was what happened at Greenback. But there were some other acquisitions. Probably one of the ones most recently was when the Forest Service picked up 3 patented mining claims in Boulder Basin. And these claims were actually purchased from the LDS Church by the Wills family, a fellow named Wes Wills that lives right down the road. Kind of he worked through this, but the other party was the Campbell family. And Sarah Campbell had worked for the Forest Service and had died in an accident, and they wanted to contribute to having something in her name. And so they purchased these 3 patented mining claims. We went through all of the land's hoops of acquisition, and then they became part of the Forest Service too. But before we could do that, we had to go in and plug all of the damn holes on the mountain. So we're back to people up there foam plugging adits, putting steel grates over adits because there were vats in there, and ultimately we got it all closed up, and we made the acquisition. And it went really pretty well. But the reason why I was interested in it was because the claims that the Forest Service picked up basically took away the future development of those claims in a big way, because they took out all of the haulage drift areas that went into the mountain. They basically took all of that capability of using the old haulage drifts. So somebody that moves into Boulder Basin now would probably have to start over completely on how to develop that property. Okay? So, anyway, so let's go back and talk about ASARCO. ASARCO was, they built a bunkhouse up in, right at Baker Lake, and they did all their exploration work, and so by the time I got there, helicopter pads were gone and everything. There was a few bags of bentonite laying around, but we hauled those out. The bunkhouse, it was dismantled and hauled out, and really ASARCO has basically done the minimum amount of assessment work since that time, but they maintain those claims. There's probably about 30 mining claims left up there, and so there really hasn't been much activity took place. But if you go back to about, the late 1960s, there was something else happening just north of the ASARCO claims. What had happened was, there was a big mining property called the Livingston Mine. And the Livingston Mine was on top of Railroad Ridge. And if you've never been to the top of Railroad Ridge, you need to go there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Bad road, don't go up there.
I took my girlfriend, who's now my wife, on our second date to where else? Railroad Ridge. Bad part of it was we ran into Elmer Swanson and a Kennecott geologist, and I finally had to say, she's a geologist. And so I said, just shake your head up and down when they talk. And these guys were talking geology way over both of our heads. Sue was over there just saying. So life was good. Life was good. But it is. It's a real spectacular place. But what happened was this Caterpillar company in 1955 had upgraded their dozers to a D9 dozer. And a D9 dozer could probably push about 500 cubic yards an hour. Big machine at the time, the biggest dozer you could probably purchase. And it just so happened that back in about 1953 to about 1957, the company that was up there went into bankruptcy. And so, out of the bankruptcy, a private party purchased the mine and the mill. That private party was Elmer and Shirley Swanson. Elmer came from Oregon. Elmer was a logger. And in fact, there's still a mill in Oregon with Swanson's name on it. It's an old-time family of logging people. And Elmer's claim to fame for the first few years I went up there was, hey, do you want to see my trophy of log rolling? I won the state of Oregon log rolling championship. That was Elmer, right? Okay. But what Elmer also did was he went into the Western States Caterpillar shop over in Boise, and he walked in the door, and if you ever saw a picture of Elmer, you'd notice that he would have two pairs of pants on at the same time. And what would happen was he'd wear out one pair of pants, so he'd put a brand new pair on underneath and then pull the old ones over the top, because there was still some good wear in that outside pair of pants. And then there was some irrigation company from southern Idaho that a guy would go up there every year and give him a white hat. Well, within about a week, that was black from grease and gunk and everything else. But every year, he'd start out the season with a white hat. So, anyway, so here he walks into Western States Cat in Boise, and I heard this story from the manager. Had moved from there to Pocatello. So when I was in Pocatello, I happened to run into the guy, and he said, "Oh my God, you know about the story about Elmer Swanson?" I said, "No, really, tell me." He says, "Well, we're all standing there in the shop, and he says, I want to talk to somebody who can sell me a dozer." So they all went, all the salesmen went in the back room, and they drew straws. And they said, "Well, you get the chance of seeing, going out and meet with this guy." Elmer pulled out a piece of paper. On the piece of paper he said, "I want a D9 dozer, maximum horsepower. I want the biggest ripper you got. I want a blade, a big U-shaped blade." Had it all listed out. And so the guy was pretty impressed. He says, "Well, maybe there's something to this." Okay, now realize this may have been the first D9 dozer shipped into Idaho that was going to be ordered at the time. So he goes into the back, he goes back out and he says, "Well, all right, so, like all car dealers, they got to get the manager out, and the manager's going to do all the number crunching for you, right? Well, in 72, you're talking probably a couple $100,000 for this piece of equipment. It's a big chunk of change." Elmer says, "Here's a phone number. Bank of Chalice. Call this guy, and he'll tell you that my check is good." So, guess what? Guy calls him up. Guy in Bank of Chalice says, "Yeah, he's good for it." They ordered the dozer. Now, the rest of the story was, when all of these articles were coming out about the destruction of the White Clouds, ASARCO, all they had done was landed a helicopter here, very few times. Elmer, on the other hand, took a D9 dozer to the top of Railroad Ridge. And he built a switchback of roads that went clear down over to Crater Lake. He built roads that went down into the head of Jim Creek. He built roads that went up to his patented mining claims. And all of this was going on right as the recreation area was being created. So, the other thing that happened was, right after the recreation area was created and they were supposed to submit plans of operations, the dozer had been dropped off on the East Fork Road. Well, the original road that went up Big Boulder, switchbacked up the hill, and then it went along the cliff face up at the top. And if you look really close, you can even see some old tunnels up there from where that went in. Well, so about 3 years into the recreation area, Elmer says, "I'm not going to drive this thing out in the snow anymore." So what's he do? He builds a road right up Boulder Creek. Remember, he was a logger. Finds the biggest trees he could find up at the end of the road, hooks onto those logs, and builds himself a bridge. And not only that, this bridge could handle the weight of a D9 dozer going over the top of it. So this dozer, I mean, this bridge was built for keeps, right? Okay. All right, so he builds the bridge, and Forest Service goes up and goes, "Oh shit, no, what do we do now? We're stuck, we got this road, we don't know what to do." So they finally just said, "Well, I guess we live with it." turned the public loose. And so now we have the public starting to go up Big Boulder Creek and enjoy the White Clouds via the Frog Lake Trail and up through there. But the trailhead was on the mining claims. So you have the Swanson family living in the man camp, and I haven't seen it in mining literature anywhere. It was called a person camp. It was a man camp. There's like 35 buildings up there, and it was to house the miners back in the day. And it probably was in the vintage of 1950. The mine itself was pre-1900. It was found probably in about 1882. In 1920s, they started doing some mining work, but the problem was they couldn't get the ore down to a place where they could process it. So they built a tram line that went, in the 30s, this tram line went from Big Boulder, or excuse me, from Railroad Ridge all the way down to Big Boulder Creek, where the mill sites were put in there. And so if you go up there today, you can still see the tram terminal that's up on the hillside. Well, so I guess the problem was the Forest Service, this was the first real test of how to try to deal with somebody and rein them in and try to get a plan of operations in place. And so, guess where they sent me? Right from the very beginning. It was not pretty. So, fortunately we worked things out, and over time they came into some compliance, but the compliance was through litigation and lots of restraining orders, and so we finally got some control. The trailhead itself, it was moved in the 80s, and that was a result of a flood on Jim Creek that went down through and it blew out the stream channel, so they had to move the trailhead at the same time, which was a good stroke of business because something was going on at that time. There was some ingenious people that were running kind of a confidence game here on the trailhead, and they said, well, you know, those are really nice bicycles up there on your car, and you know, if you're going to hike up into Boulder Chain Lakes or wherever, we'll watch those bikes for you for a little money. So this went on for a little while, and there was reports all the time. Somebody stole my bike up at the trailhead at Livingston. Yeah, this went on and went on. So the Forest Service, they sent these, the Wilderness Ranger, Dave Lee, and Mo Shrum, and a couple of other guys, and they staked it out. They were in a trailer, and they closed the blinds, and they staked it out for a whole weekend. Nothing happened. And they even intentionally sent cars up there with bikes on them. There was no contact made. It was a bummer. But it did at least slow it down. Somehow the word got out, and so that stopped. Okay, so then I guess the other thing about Livingston that I'll share with you is Shirley Swanson had a red Volkswagen. And if you ever drove up there, you'd always look way up ahead to make sure that red Volkswagen wasn't coming. Because if it was, you better find a wide spot in the road to pull off. Because it was her road. And you better be careful, you're going to get run over. So Shirley, she'd drive in and out. I got in good graces with Shirley because I'd go up there about once a week. I'd always take a gallon of milk up with me. So I became friends with Shirley. Okay. I'm looking at my notes because 40 years ago it's tough to remember a lot of this stuff. You know. The litigation that took place had to do with tunnel sites. There's 4 different types of locations under the 1872 mining law. Lode claims, placer claims, mill sites, and tunnel sites. Very seldom here at tunnel sites. It was an exploration tool where they would start a tunnel and basically tunnel into the mountain, and if they encountered any mineralization along the way, they'd come out and stake a mining claim. This came about because of a guy named Adolph Sutro in the Comstock lode, and he developed this miles-long tunnel that went into the Comstock lode. So that was part of the mining law. Well, there was one up at Livingston, but the problem with tunnel sites is you have to show diligence. You have to show progress every 6 months. So they were deficient for a lot of years. We documented it, and ultimately they dropped the tunnel site. The other thing was mill sites. And mill sites, mill sites are 5-acre locations, and they're primarily for milling purposes, usually around water. They're so you'll have your non-mineral in character. So you'll put your facilities on non-mineral in character land, and then you'll have this area for processing. And what happened was, during the litigation, they said, well, you have to have use and occupancy, and that has carried through into the regulations today. Now, here's an interesting twist. The regulations for the recreation area came in 1972. For general forest, or let's say the Chalice Forest, the Salmon, the Boise, those regulations came in 1974. So what they did was, the same people who really drafted the recreation area regulations, they drafted eventually the regulations that covered the entire United States. There was a little bit of difference. This one dealt with significant impact, whereas the ones in the 1974 Act, they were more for significant surface disturbance. Those are the triggering words in it for plans of operations. Okay. So what happened was, over time, the trailhead was relocated, and about that time period, or a little bit after that, Elmer passed away, and so it went into his family. And really, the only family member that spends much time up there now is Ron Swanson. And sometimes if you're up in the area, you'll run into Ron Swanson. And he's just like a chip off the old block. I got a picture of him standing next to the regional hazmat coordinator. But the picture is from behind, because there was a big rip in Ron's pants and his butt was hanging out. I thought it was pretty appropriate for a Forest Service person to be so intimate with this mining claimant. But had good relations with Ron. Youngest son, Alfred, not so much. He was pretty tough to deal with. Dave Swanson, he runs a construction company, I believe, in the Boise area, and has done real well. And ultimately, they found inside some of the buildings up there, somebody was growing marijuana. So they sent the Forest Service, law enforcement people up there, the county sheriff's office got involved, and so they all came up, and they had authorization from the court to be able to go through the buildings and find the marijuana, and which they did. It wasn't too tough. You looked right in the window. Oh, there it is. Damn, those are big tomato plants. The other thing they found, though, was when we went on up a ways, we looked in one of the buildings, and in the ceiling there was blasting caps hanging out of the ceiling. So had to have the hazmat people come in and dispose of the explosives. We found hundreds and hundreds of blasting caps. But they also found the red Volkswagen. That was pretty cool. But the funniest part of the whole thing was, they opened the door on one of those, and it was clear full of bicycles. Oh boy. Anyway, let's move on. Enough about Livingston. Let's go down to Slate Creek, because we can drop down over the ridge from Railroad Ridge, and we can go down into Slate Creek. The carbonate mining claims that were owned and operated by Fletcher Fisher. Now, my notes here, the very first line says, a not too friendly miner. Fletcher was one of those in-your-face kind of guys. And my first visit up there was in 1980. I'll never forget it because the two mineral examiners in Ketchum said, oh, let's send Jeff up to Carbonate Creek now. You know, he's done such a good job with some of these other places. Let's send him up there and see how he fares with Fletcher Fisher. So I'd been given a Chevy Love, a two-wheel drive Chevy Love for the summer. Yeah, I couldn't even drive it off the road, the pavement. I mean, this thing, you know, was so low. So what I did was I loaded my motorcycle in the back, my personal motorcycle, which I found out later, you got to have training with a Forest Service to drive it. Yeah, never mind. Anyway, so I'd go up all these places. I'd just hop on the motorcycle and go up and visit with the miners. Well, so I headed up Slate Creek, and they had explained that you got to go through this property, you cross down through this creek bed, and you go up the other side, and then there's this road that winds up through the drainage bottom, and it comes up right up to the lode claims up there, and you'll see, you know, that people have been working up there for years. Okay, no problem. So I drive up there, unload the motorcycle. What the hell? Why do they have me driving up there when there's a road that just goes right up the side of the mountain here? So I take the motorcycle, I drive up on this road that's probably 25 feet wide, like a freeway right up the road. Well, what had happened was over the winter, the mineral examiners in Ketchum didn't realize that Fletcher Fisher had built himself a road right down Silva Rule Creek. I mean, it was just boom right there. Anyway, so I get up the mine, and there's these two miners sitting there, and they're on break. It's lunchtime. They're on break. I just got through driving by. There was some deer hanging up. And wait a minute, this is like July? Oh, Gary. Oh, you didn't hear me say that, did you? Anyway, so I got up there, and these two miners, they looked at me, and they stopped eating, and they were staring at me, and they said, what are you doing here? How'd you get here? I said, oh, I just drove my motorcycle up the road. Well, who do you work for? I said, I work for the Forest Service. And they said, oh my God, there's going to be a guy come out of that mine here in about 5 minutes. You better get the hell out of here right now. And I said, oh, I don't think so. I think I'll be all right. I said, no. And so these two guys scattered. They left, and I'm like, what the heck? About that time, here comes a short guy out of the mine portal. He looks at us. Blink, blank, blink. Are you? I said, oh, I'm Jeff Gabardi. I'm from the Forest Service. I'm here to help you. And they said, his face turned bright red, and he was in my face instantly. Well, I said, well, I just really came up to see what you were doing. I'm a mining engineer. All of a sudden, he was a different guy. He said, oh, could you come up this weekend? We'll map underground. Let me, come on. I got a hard hat. Let me take you underground. We'll show you around. This is great. I appreciate you coming up. Oh, wow, that was a real quick turn. So, underground we went, looked around. By the way, there's a real nice specimen of lead that came from that mine over here. And when you get done, if you want to look some rocks at these places, they're over here. Thanks to Stuart. Stuart's brought in a whole bunch of really cool specimens for you to look at. So anyway, so that everything about the Fletcher Fisher situation was a train wreck. He was in litigation. Forest Service contested 120 of his mining claims in one fell swoop. He wrote the regulations that are used nationwide on floating mining claims. Mineral examiners would go out and inspect where they thought his mining claims were, only to find out that, no, I switched them. They're up on the hill over here. No, they're on up the road a few miles. This went on for years. It was a mess. So finally, they went in and they contested, they got a good enough case, and they contested all the mining claims. Well, the other thing that happened was he had 5 mill sites, and so it ended up that he had ended up with 1 lode claim, carbon number 8, never forget it, and these mill sites. Well, then he had a filing error with the BLM, and if you lose your mining claim in the recreation area, you can't refile. So he lost his mill sites. So this was in 1992, and between 1992 and 1994, Fletcher, he tried to sell the property to at least 2 other parties, Northwest Silver, and to a replacement corporation, a guy named John Pender. Okay, so I get this phone call from the mineral administrator up here in the recreation area, Kim Hofeld. Wonderful woman, wonderful woman. Wouldn't say shit if she had a mouthful. Sorry about that. Very nice woman. She calls up and says, oh, the Penders want to come up and meet with us in Twin Falls. They're coming from Salt Lake, Park City, I think, and they said they'd meet us in Twin Falls. I said, us? I'm out of that. I don't do it. No, I don't do that anymore. I said, no, I really need your help. Okay. So we line up the conference room. So here comes Kim on her way down. She calls me up on the way down. She says, oh, you're not going to guess what happened. I just was listening to the news, and there's an all-points bulletin out for John Pender. He's killed somebody down in Utah. I said, what? Killed somebody down in Utah? You got to be kidding me. You know, this fits in that category. You can't make up these kind of stories. I said, all right, well, keep on coming down. I'll get a hold of our law enforcement officer, and shit, maybe the guy will show up. Never can tell. Okay, so law enforcement officer, Kim and I, sitting in the conference room, speakerphone on. Front desk lady says, hey, you got a phone call. Somebody's calling you, Kim. Oh, okay. Who gets on the phone? John Pender. John Pender says, I won't be able to meet with you guys today. I'm a little tied up right now. I said, okay. All right. Well, I mean, what are you going to say? Okay. All right. Well, talk to you later. Unbelievable. But very courteous. I mean, really courteous. These miners are courteous people. All right. Okay, I better get back on track here. The Silva Rule claim, which is up there above the carbonate claim, the neatest part of it was Ford Motor Company's mining claims. Anybody have an idea why Ford Motor Company back in the 30s would want a mining claim for lead? Batteries, exactly. So, the neatest part of it was I just happened to be wandering through the woods, and I ran across where these claims were, and there were some old buildings up on the hillside, really cool old place. But what was really neat was there were some old wooden mining cars, and stamped on the side of those wooden mining cars was Ford Motor Company. And I would have loved to have been able to get one of those out of there. One of them did end up. Fishers hauled it out, and I'm not sure if it's still in their family or not, but that was a neat place. Then, if we go on up Slate Creek Road, we get to the Hudu Mine. And the Hudu Mine was in operation right up until the recreation area was created. And I think in about 1968 or about 70, it shut down. But it was a big producer of zinc. And zinc was needed for galvanizing. And so they had a real big market, and they were producing zinc ore, and they were processing it there. It was owned by a guy named David Ensign out of Utah, and in 1985 he sold the mill equipment. And I learned about this because I had a college professor from Moscow call me and said, hey, we just caught wind that a mill is being moved out of central Idaho, and it's going to South America. And so I I was like, wait a minute, I only know of one that could possibly be happening. So I drove up there, and sure enough, the equipment was being dismantled, loaded, and they were heading it to the west coast to ship it out. So that's what happened to the mill. The building itself, it was partially collapsed. Forest Service went in probably in the last 5 years and helped knock it down. Let's go back just for a second on Fletcher's claims, though. His claims were reclaimed in about 90, probably the 96, 97, somewhere in that time period. And so the Forest Service, we're up there, we're reclaiming the road, and we're also taking out all of the equipment. Terry's smiling back there because he was involved with the impoundment of this. And of course, Forest Service, we went up there and put in a big steel gate, put a lock on it, and forced Fletcher into possibly moving off a bunch of his old equipment off the mill sites and everything. So, we got everything hauled out. We're doing the death march on the road coming out of there. And if you're familiar with Muzzy Braun's place, it's the road. You can just see the remnants of a road that was completely recontoured. That road I told you about driving up. And Scott Erickson with the Forest Service C&M crew, and also another operator. I took them down to Nevada, and we looked at a place where they were recontouring with 2 excavators working in tandem, and they completely recontoured that road for about 2 miles coming out of there. And it's a pretty damn good job. I mean, if most people would drive by and wouldn't even notice it was there. Problem was, we got clear down to the bottom, had an excavator, dozer, something else, maybe a water truck or something on the other side of the creek. And if you recall, there was a major flood that went down through Slate Creek, and that was in shoot, I can't remember. It happened right as we got the damn equipment down there to the bottom. And this flood went through, and it was on a Labor Day weekend. So we ended up leaving the equipment there, and we had to get authorization. There's a big log jam stuck in there. We had to get authorization to be able to remove part of the log jam out of it to get the equipment back across the road. It was a heck of a mess. But the other thing it did, it really hurt the potential for doing some, for the access to the Hudu Mine, because it took out a lot of that road, and it has about 3 meanders that go through where the roadbed was. And so now, in order for us to get back up in there, we'd have to have about 3 temporary bridges to go across. So that's kind of put a stall on what's happened with Hudu. Enough about Slate Creek. Let's go to Rough Creek. Rough Creek just down the river. The file on Rough Creek really was a Chalice National Forest file, and it had to do with 1965. There was a Public Law 167 passed, and it was a Surface Rights Act. And so what happened was the Forest Service was required to get permission from mining claimants to be able to log on surface rights claims. Well, Seagraves had filed for surface rights, and so when I first got there, there was this strip of 9 mining claims that went right up the bottom of the drainage, where the timber was still intact, big, huge trees and everything. It was, and if you looked at the aerial photos, everything around it was clear cut. So the bridge that goes across to Rough Creek was a result. That came in right before the recreation area, and it was to haul timber out of there primarily. That's how they were able to get the timber out. Okay, so looking in that file, the interesting part, there was all kinds of reports of somebody firing shells over the heads of surveyor crews with the Forest Service and timber marking crews with the Forest Service. And it just so happens that Israel Jack Seagraves was sitting up at his cabin, and he would just kind of lob a shell over the top of people's heads every once in a while, just to make sure they knew he was there. All right. So Seagraves, he lived to be over 100 years old, and he was in his 90s, and he was. I never met him. I probably could have, but I would have had to meet him at a nursing facility in Twin Falls. But I did meet his son and worked with his son on the mining claim work that went on. There was a little story about right next to his Rough Creek cabin up at the top, there was a cleared area. And if you looked on the old maps, there was actually an airport had been identified on the maps right next to the cabin. Well, if you ever went up there and you went, oh my God, this is only like 300 feet long, and it goes right up this hill. There's no airport here. There was an airport, but it was really only for one guy. And that one guy just happened to be dating Seagrave's daughter. And he got the idea, well, I'm going to clear these trees out of here. You bring your airplane in here, you land your airplane, and then my daughter wants to go on a picnic. So load her in the airplane, fly down Rough Creek, take a hard left, fly up into Warm Springs Meadow, land the airplane, and have a picnic. So that's how this airport came about. All right. I don't know. I don't think I'd ride in an airplane out of there. I mean, it would have been a scary deal. But this guy just happened to be, his name was Lawrence Johnson. Does that ring a bell with any of you? The Haley Airport at one time was referred to as Johnson Field. And a guy named Johnson, Lawrence Johnson, used to land his airplane across the tarmac and pull right into his hangar. So see, this guy was probably one of the early backcountry pilots. He was a pretty amazing guy. All right. The other part about, there was a hydraulic monitor that was set up there, and they, mining engineers, the cheapest way to move dirt is use water. So you basically set up a ditch line, comes down, puts water through there, and then you blow the hillside down into sluice boxes, and then you can get your gold out of the sluice boxes. Well, it just so happened that we were doing a mineral exam up there, and we actually dug up the hydraulic monitor, the cannon for it. And I unbolted it, and it was in my apartment for about a year and a half in Boise. Leaned up against the wall. It was about 9 feet long. And so about that time, the Chalice Museum was coming in. And I told them, if you guys are willing to go up, I'll show you where the ball joint is for it. You haul the ball joint down to the museum, and I'll give you the rest of it. And that's what happened. That's the one that's on display up there now in Chalice. So we were constantly looking for swims claims up Rough Creek. Isaac Swim was like the Lost Dutchman of the recreation area. He drowned crossing the river. Actually, there's two things named after Swim. Swim Lake and Dead Man's Hole, because he ended up floating in Dead Man's Hole. And anyway, the story goes, he had a lot of very high-grade ore, and nobody knows really where it came from. But we had these mining claimants. We spent a lot of time up in Rough Creek wandering about the hills. These mining claimants would think that they had swims claims. So anyway, okay, so I want to just jump from here, and let's go down to 4th of July Creek, because I'm probably running way over time anyway. 4th of July Creek, if you take a Chevy Love pickup in 1972 up 4th of July, chances are you're not going to have any shocks left on it. You're probably going to have most of the undercarriage bunged up, and you're going to have the oil pan leaking oil somewhere. All right, this took It always take me probably an hour and 15 minutes from the highway to get up to Elmer's claims. Elmer was one claimant. There was, I don't know, 5 or 6 cabins up there. Elmer had 3 cabins to begin with, right above where the trailhead is. There were 3 metal buildings in a row. And that's where Elmer, his claims were. Or excuse me, that's where he stayed when he was up there. Before that, though, there was George Blackman's claim and Blackman Peak. There's photos in Redfish of Blackman. He was a black man. And Stewart, the story goes, he was actually a slave, and he escaped slavery, and he ended up in Idaho, and he ended up there. There was another interesting cabin. There was a big, long cabin, and it was owned by a guy named Antonio Caprelli. And Antonio Caprelli, his family was ready for this. The Giampetraglia family. You know, what's that? They're locals, right? Exactly. Good. I'm glad somebody picked up on that. They are. They're locals, and they had mining claims up in that area, and they were over on the top of Strawberry Basin and the silver dollar claims up in there. But Elmer, he had one thing about old miners in that time period, they were pretty reclusive. They lived a pretty meager life, and they all drove international pickups. So I'd go up there and I'd visit Elmer, and Elmer would always have 2 or 3 international pickups laying around, usually parked on a hill, so you could roll them down the hill to get them started, and then off you went. So we went up to look at the Meadowview claim, which is when you get to the trailhead, then you head to the south, and then you go up past the Rupert claim, the Red Robin claims, which are Molly claims, and then you get to the Meadowview. The Meadowview was mined by Elmer in the 50s under a DMEA contract, Defense Minerals contract, where the government actually paid him to mine it to develop a resource of tungsten. Okay? Tungsten's a cool mineral in that if you're underground, you really prospect for it and you figure out where you are by using a black light. And so you'd get underground, you'd turn your headlamp off, and you'd turn the black light on. And then it was like you're in the 70s in a psychedelic movie. You're like, oh, look at that, blues and greens, and you know, look like, I was going to say mushrooms. No, never mind. Anyway, so I went up and I'd help him map his claims every once in a while, and in return, he'd give me plans of operations. And so this relationship went on for about 4 or 5 years. Well, we went up to the Meadowview, and he had just rolled his international down to get us started. He said, hop in, I got hats, lights, everything, we're going up the Meadowview. So I get up the Meadowview, Elmer backs the international up this talus slope. And so I said, oh geez, Elmer, this could get kind of scary, you trying to roll this thing to get us started. Oh no, I've done it hundreds of times. No problem, no problem. Okay. So we went underground, we did our mapping, we come back out, climb in the international pickup, and we are out of control going backwards down a talus slope. In the corner of my eye, the key is not on. That's where Elmer, turn on the key. He reaches down, turns on the key, starts right up and says, whoa, that was pretty close. Off we went. Jeez. Lots of stories about Elmer. I guess one of the ones that I'd like to share with you is his partner, Alan Getty, who kind of grub-staked him. He'd help him out. Getty called me up in the first part of November. He said, I haven't heard from Elmer. And it was notorious in that time that there was always a major snowstorm around Halloween. And there was, right on cue, pretty good snowstorm. So Getty calls and he says, could you by chance run up there and check on him? So we ran up. My son and I, we'd come up to Stanley and we'd cut a load of firewood. And we headed up there, and I got turned right there by the Rupert claim, probably quarter mile from the turn there at the trailhead. Slid off the road. So here we are, nobody at the trailhead. So I said, all right, Drew, 5-year-old son, let's hike in to Elmer's, and if Elmer's not there, we'll just stay in his cabin. We'll come out tomorrow. Not a problem. 5-year-old, it's not fun, you know, it's pretty scary. Anyway, we hiked in through a foot to probably 18 inches of snow. We got in there, and on the gate at the Meadowview there was a sign that said SOS written on a paper bag. And underneath in little letters, wobbly letters, it said, I've hurt my leg and I can't get out. Elmer. So we went on into the cabin. The thing about Elmer though, Elmer had listened to a jackleg drill for about 30 years of his life up in Butte. Couldn't hear a damn thing. So we're trying to get his attention. I told her, just get up on the hill, just start waving your arms and we'll get his attention. And finally we did. And we went down there, sure enough, he'd hurt his leg, needed some firewood into his cabin, so we helped him with that. And then I said, Elmer, I'm stuck back there. Is there some way, do you have a come-along or something I could winch myself out? He said, oh yeah, I got come-alongs. So, typical miner, we go around the building, and here's these huge cable come-alongs. I mean, these suckers, they probably weigh about 150 pounds a piece. And I went, oh God, Elmer, I can't do that. And he said, oh, I got a wheelbarrow. All right, so loaded him in the wheelbarrow, and off we went. Loaded Drew in the wheelbarrow too. Long time out of there. It was tough. Fortunately, I got back, and there was a couple of Air Force guys that were hunting up in there, and they helped me get the pickup out. I got back about 11 o'clock at night, called Getty, said, you need to come up and get Elmer. And Elmer, the next day, Getty went in and got him. But of course, Elmer became a friend for life. I mean, you know, that's just the way it was. But the BLM, he had failed to file on his mining claims, and he ended up losing all of his mining claims that same year. And he came back and he didn't get them filed correctly, so he ended up losing his mining claims. I moved to Boise, I was asked to come back over by the ranger at the time. I don't think it was Al Ashton, it might have been somebody else, but they asked me to come back over and sit down with Elmer, explain to him. And if you have never seen an 84-year-old man cry, that was a tough meeting I had with Elmer. And what I'd done is I'd worked out an agreement with the forest ranger that Elmer could continue to come back up there as long as he worked underground, and that's what he wanted to do anyway. So he moved moved out of the cabin. They reclaimed the cabins right there by the trailhead, and he moved up to the Meadowview cabin. And that's the cabin that's still sitting up there today. And he continued to work for a couple of years underground, and then I got word that was it. He wasn't coming back up. So anyway, I know I've probably used a ton of your time, and I appreciate you guys all sticking it out with me. But I'd like to have Stuart come up just for a few minutes and talk about the Beaver Creek claims, because his uncle was one of those old-timers that ended up with the Beaver Creek Pilgrim claims and another little property called Sunbeam Mountain. So come up, Stuart. And Stuart also, he brought in a bunch of samples that afterwards, if you'd like to go over and look, there's some really good quality specimens of the different minerals that came out of the recreation area. Ready?
I'm ready. Well, it's interesting catching back up with this guy. Actually, I used to have to file my operating plans with Jeff back in the day.
That's right.
Working up in Joe's Gulch, Kelly Creek country. But yeah, going up into the Beaver Creek area, my great uncle Martin. I came out when I was about 13 years old to see what my uncle was up to. He and Marjorie Pollock would summer up here, and Martin was a retired mining engineer. But as you heard, Martin had the claims at the Pilgrim Mine up Beaver Creek, and he also had the Sunbeam. So, boy, I tell you what, lots of stories. You know, Martin came up into this valley in 1924, and he knew all of the old timers, the mail carriers who used to deliver mail back into Sawtooth City back in the day. And when he would tell stories, you know, every time we go out with him, you know, he would have a story about something. I'll share a quick one with you. If you go up into Washington Basin where George Blackman was operating, and at the turnoff where you have Three Cabin Creek, there were 3 cabins that were there, and Martin would tell, he stopped. We had 5 of us who were on this trip of going up into Washington Basin. He said, we got to stop for just a second. There's an old story that one of these buildings was a saloon, one was a boarding house, and the other was a sort of a warehouse building.
By the way, boarding house in mining terminology, that's politically correct.
Yes. It was for the miners as a transients through the country. So there was a story that this miner prospector walked into the saloon one night and ordered a bottle of whiskey, sat down at the table, and just minded his own business. And it came to closing time. The bartender went over and he noticed he'd fallen asleep or passed out on the table. Went to shake him, and he fell over on the floor. He'd passed away. He said the story was that the group took him across the road and buried him. So Martin said, okay, all 5 of us were going to fan out across the way, and we're going to just search. And sure enough, by golly, as Martin would say, we found an unmarked grave up there. You know, and Martin just gets the biggest grin on his face and said, we can go on now to the next spot. You know? But Martin knew all the old characters. You know, I don't know if people knew 4th of July got its name from back in the late 1800s. All the miners in the area decided to have a big get-together, and they decided to do it at the head of 4th of July Creek up near Elmer's Claims in that country. But and the story was there was about 90 miners and prospectors that got together for this event, and ever since then 4th of July Creek got its name back in the day. So that's an old Martin story. So
tell them the names on Fisher Creek real quick too. The Fisher-Bourne mine, and how some of those names came about. So
I don't know much about the Bourne. But
the original patent on the Aztec claim that was up there, it was under the Fisher-Bourne name. Fisher Creek, Bourne Lakes. They corrected the spelling on it a few years ago. It's B-O-O-R-N, and that was him. And he was a photographer in the Haley area, but he grub-staked some of the miners. And the Aztec mine, it had a 700-foot decline shaft. The mine superintendent at the mine was
Frank Shaw.
That name sound familiar? Some of us live on Shaw Mesa Road. So.
Yeah, Frank was he was a mining guy from back in Missouri, and they sent him out to be the superintendent of what became the Aztec Fisher Mine. Yeah. And when it shut down, it was actually Kitty Shaw, Catherine, his wife, who made the recommendation, let's not go back, let's homestead here. So they did. They set up shop right there at the head of Fisher Creek in 1902, and so they were the second homesteaders in the valley. It's just a really kind of cool story. We have a lot of photos of them in the archives here at the museum as well, from what it was like back in those days. But it was actually Martin who was working for the Williams Ranch, and my great aunt from Indiana would come out to visit the Shaws because there was a school teacher who knew Kitty Shaw from New Albany, Indiana, and one of the school teachers would hire two two teachers to drive him across the country. So Marjorie would come out and spend the summers at the Shaw Ranch while Martin was working with Ted Williams at the Williams Ranch, and Martin had his eye on Marge, and Ted had his eye on the other teacher. I don't know whatever happened there, but Martin and Marge eventually got together, and they lived a very long life together. The Sunbeam Mine was a very interesting area, and a lot of interesting characters. We didn't go into George Castle,
Right.
but George worked for Martin up there, and George was just a really interesting guy. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He mined on on Estes Mountain across. He found the Castle vein, which ran about $1 million worth of gold off the Wolfley table in a week. And George found all of his prospects with his witching stick. And Martin and I never, I'm a geologist, Martin and I never believed it. So Martin had him up on top of the mountain one day, and they were looking for a contact, and they hadn't excavated anything yet. Jack was phenomenal with his green dozer.
Yeah.
But he always kept his witching stick under the seat. So Martin put a flag down on the ground and said, "This is where I think it is." And he said, "You do the same, George, with your witching stick." And so George put a flag down, and they scraped the top of the surface, and guess who was right on the money? George. George also had a girlfriend.
Do you want me to tell us?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. George had a girlfriend, and her name was Carol. And some of you may have seen the very first mountain biker in the recreation area. And I'm telling you, she set the bar for mountain biking in the recreation area. You'd see her coming down the road, dark tan, bright red lipstick, and a bikini on. And so this went on up Yankee Fork for years. People would say, "God, did you see that lady come on a bicycle?" Oh, gee, went on and on. "God, you'd see her clear down at Galena Summit." I'd pull over every once in a while and say, "Is George going to come pick you up?" "Oh yeah, I left him this morning, and he said he'll pick me up on the way." Just the way it was. George moves over to Twin Springs, over on the Middle Fork of the Boise River. We're working on a mineral exam. And so, of course, Carol comes along. First of all, first day out, I pull up. George climbs out of the back of his pickup, typical George Castle form, slept in the back of his pickup, was wanting to be there as soon as we got there to start the mineral exam. He was a hardcore miner prospector. And so we got out, we got everything going, and the lead mineral examiner, Ray Wallace, and I go walking around the hill, and the first thing out is there's a big damn rattlesnake right in the middle of the trail. Oh geez, so we kind of hedge around the rattlesnake, and we walk on around the hill. Well, here's Carol sunbathing. We're like, oh boy. So we turn around, we go back, and Ray says, how the hell are we going to get over there to where we need to go? And by that time, Carol had put her clothes on. She'd come around the hill. Says, "God, I hope I didn't turn you guys on." Ray looked at me, I looked at him, and it was one of those kind of things, well, what do you say to something like that? Afterwards, Ray says, "I was thinking about going back and seeing that rattlesnake again." No, but good people. Carol was great, and when George Castle filed probably the last real placer mining plan of operations on the recreation area on the faith claims, and they were up in Stanley Creek, up by Buckley Bar, if you're familiar with that area. Anyway, he mined it for a couple of seasons and found a lot of gold, just like George always did. He always found gold no matter where he was. And then the other part of that was he got the claims from Milo Evans. And so, see, all of these prospectors weren't men. There was a few women involved here. Milo Evans was John Weedman, who had the reservoir up on Kelly Creek and hydraulic mined a lot of that area for years and years. Well,
His daughter was Viola. Viola had moved to San Francisco and she was a legal secretary. But when Weidman passed away, she got the claims. And so she got George to come out and file a plan of operations to do this work on their funniest plan of operations I ever saw, bar none. Went through one page. We're going to go up, we're going to placer mine. I've got this seed mix, wildflowers, listed the wildflowers, equipment. Oh, we're going to dig some test pits. Equipment needed, backhoe, pickup, and a D8 bulldozer. Viola, that terrible Terex green, who George had two of them, and I called them substantial impairment green and significant disturbance green. And so anyway, he mined that area up there. But we could spend hours talking just about George. He was everywhere, here and down there. He hauled the waste rock dumps off of Boulder Basin back in the 30s and 40s. So when I first went up into Boulder Basin, I'm like, what the hell? There's hardly any mining up here. Nothing took place. I mean, there's no waste rock dumps, nothing. Well, he'd hauled them all out because you got to realize it was $20 gold when they were mining that, or less. Well, those waste rock dumps, he direct shipped those to Utah to the smelter, made lots of money. So that's how he kind of got his start. Went up Beaver Creek and up in Vienna and also hauled waste rock dumps out of there too. By the way, the ore at Beaver Creek, it's called Perustite and Peragirite, and it's fancy terms for ruby silver. And there was, back in the day, people would have a campfire with rocks that would literally melt silver out of the rocks. 450 ounces per ton to 1,000 ounces per ton in the stuff. Incredible high value. And it was kind of neat because it was silver in quartz, but it had kind of a ruby red tint to it. And you could see it real easy in thin section.
Yeah, if you scratch it, it would bleed.
Yeah.
Red.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I appreciate you guys all staying. I will tell you, I brought up a bunch of names, held all of these people in the highest respect. They were my clients. Well, wait a minute, Fletcher? No. It was pretty amazing early on in the career, and now if you guys have any questions for us, we'd be happy to entertain your questions. Anybody?
What's happening with the Livingston mill?
The
A lot of
Livingston.
activity going on, reclaiming or cleaning up and all that. What's happening with that?
There was a circle action where the Forest Service came in and did all of the tailings. They took all of the tailings and put them up into a repository and then covered it. And so that was the first big part about reclaiming that site, because it wasn't the water quality issues. There was a few here and there. The springs might have been impacted, but the big thing was the wind blowing the tailings everywhere, and so that was a big project. By the way, remember that bridge I told you about down there at the bottom? Well, the Forest Service came in and said, that log stringer bridge, you got to get rid of it. So they tore it out, and the Forest Service put a bridge in. So then when the Circula contract came in, the contractor, he was going to do everything with rubber-tired scrapers. And he was going to move all of those tailings with scrapers because it's really a lot cheaper than hauling them a different way. So he goes back up and looks at it after he's won the bid. He can't get the scrapers across the bridge because they're not built strong enough. So if the log stringer would have probably been there, they probably could have got it in. But when they were hauling the dozer out, when the D9 came out, Dave Swanson, he actually turned that D9 around, backed it down off the hill, drove it down the stream bed, and back up the other side. I saw it being hauled out on a low boy and said, how in the hell did he ever do that? Because I was there when they were trying to haul a D8 dozer across that bridge. They ended up having to put a big long low boy loaded on in order to have enough axles to get it across the bridge. So that was something that, you know.
Was Dave who put the dozer in the creek and not the guys that bought the dozer?
No, Dave actually did it. Yeah, Dave was the one who got it out. So, any other questions, anybody?
What are the details on the mine up towards Loon Creek guard station that you see on?
Oh, that's
Up Panther Creek.
Oh,
Grouse Creek?
Yeah.
oh,
Was the old sawmill.
oh, wait a minute. No, you're talking about, it's a new operation that they're considering?
Well, no, it's pretty well, looks like it's in operation.
It's gotta be.
Oh, it must be Grouse Creek.
Grouse
Grouse Creek, okay. Yeah, the Grouse Creek claims were patented, and Hecla Mining Company owns the patent on it. And they are, basically the main thing that's going on there is water treatment. And they are treating water that comes from the underground, and then they are piping it down to the Yankee Fork after it meets the water quality standards, and they inject it into the Yankee Fork down there. So, and by the way, my working relationship with Hecla Mining Company has been very good, not just there, but at Greens Creek in Alaska. I worked on the reclamation bonds with Hecla, and they've done everything there that they've been asked to do. So, any other questions?
I got one.
Okay.
I didn't know you were associated with marketing. I wonder if you got the paperwork. I was just talking to, Elton Modrew.
You do. I've not met Eldon yet.
So I was just up with Elton up at the Beaver in Bidwell, and we went underground there for a minute. He's like, "Oh, that's a survey marker. That's Mark Paul." And so I was wondering if he had any leftover paperwork.
I don't. It went to another nephew of his. I'd love to see somebody because he had all the underground maps.
It would be great to have some underground maps to see what.
Pilgrim was dangerous though. There's a bad shear zone in there that.
Pilgrim?
Couldn't even get Earl Waite to spile through it.
Yeah, well, that's what I heard Earl bagged out on that. But I've got the Bidwell and the Beaver extension, which are directly above the Sunbeam.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there was
way up.
Martin had a story of it, and this may tie into your finding of that the gold scales up. It was in there. There was one winter where the miners decided that they, rather than spend the winter in Sawtooth City, they wanted to mine all through the winter. So they brought a steam boiler up there, and they mined underground all winter long. And once you're up in that country, I think there's about 17 snow slides in that valley, and it's got one of the worst avalanche country as far as valleys go up Beaver Creek. But that was an interesting story, and I think you knew of a guy who got back in there and opened things up, and you found an old gold scale in there, which kind of tells me they probably had were doing some assay work, rather than taking it down to Sawtooth City at the time. So.
Yeah, the Bidwell, a guy named Bob Caldwell opened up the Bidwell in about 1985 and went in about 100 feet, and there was an area back in there where there was a dog hole dug out, and on a workbench there was a wooden box, opened up the wooden box, and there was actually an old gold scale inside the wooden box. And I'd love to have that, let me tell you.
We'd love to have it at the museum.
Oh yeah.
Plugging it.
Any other questions?
Thanks so much.
Good.